Next job on the Mondeo Mk3 suspension, front suspension, is the drop links. These are the links which go between the shock and the sway bar. They're just two ball joints with a simple tie. I thought mine were all right actually, because there wasn't much play in them, or it wasn't any play in them that I could feel when they were connected. But when I look closely, the boots are split completely all the way around, and on all four of them, both sides. So yeah, it's not good. So they're a cheap part and relatively easy to replace. So since I was doing the shock anyway, and you've already got to undo one half of them to get the shock free, might as well replace them.
And the half that you disconnect for the shocks is the top ball joint at this strap bracket. And that's the one that you would start with anyway, because the bottom half might be a bit harder to access until the top is released. More on that soon. You just undo this 15mm nut, which is easy to get to from the outside. I used a bar. And then if the threads are more resistant than the ball joint itself as you try to back it out, what will happen is the joint will just turn. So then you'll need to hold the stud, for which this little 5mm female hex is provided at the end of the stud. So I used a ring spanner and an Allen key to do this. It's a little awkward, and the smarter way would be to either use a ratcheting spanner, fancy toys that I don't have, or instead of the Allen key, use a hex bit on a ratchet handle. But that was too smart for me, so I saw out the struggle like this. Once it's loose, the stud will pop off the strap bracket. If the suspension is all old and worn in, then it's likely that it's relaxed when the car is lifted like this, so the link won't have any tension on it. But you can't take that for granted, especially if there are new components. So just keep your fingers clear as you push out the link, because it might suddenly shift. Now, I'm not showing it, but I disconnected the other side top half at the same time, because then the whole sway bar will be relaxed and easier to work with. It's still awkward to get a socket on this lower nut. A spanner would work better, but I don't have a long enough one to break these nuts loose. So what I did was just shove a bit of timber under the end of the bar, enough to lift it up a little bit. And this also gives me then a solid surface to lever against, because otherwise when you turn the socket bar, it will just deflect the sway bar because it's a spring. Then it's just to repeat the struggle with the spinning ball joint stud. Sometimes these do just come off, but if you're replacing an old link like this, then there's probably not much friction in the joint, so it will spin. If you don't care about the old ones, you might just get a pair of vice grips and mash them onto the ball, through the boot actually. And because all of this is relaxed, this will just fall out without too much risk to fingers. I gave this end of the bar a little cleanup while I could. Also, this is a good time to check the other aspect of the sway bar that might be giving you grief, which is these bushers and its attachments to the subframe. Now, because you've disconnected everything, you can quite easily play with the sway bar. You can push one end of the bar up and down by hand, and just check that nothing's very loose or knocking about in there. Mine look fine. What didn't look fine were the ball joints. Boots all split and missing most of their grease. As I said, these weren't playing up just yet, but over time you'd expect the joint to wear quickly and then start getting sloppy and making noise. Here are the new ones, nice and stiff of course, nice new boots. You also get the replacement nylock nuts, so no need to reuse your old ones. You can throw those out. Installing is just the reverse of removal of course, except for torquing the nuts. I repeated the struggle with the Allen key, and then once the nut is tightened against the bar, usually the extra resistance will be enough for it to hold itself while you torque it. And you can do the final tightening, without having to hold the counter rotation. The torque specs for these nuts is 48 Newton meters. I don't have a very small torque wrench to suit that amount of force, so I couldn't get my big one in there to get very good access for it. On the right side, I was able to use an extension to get at it from the opposite side of the subframe across the top. Although this doesn't work on the left side because the gearbox is in the way. On this one, I also found the ball joint did not hold itself, and it just kept rotating like this. But I was rescued because I found that the Phoebe Bilstein aftermarket links, which I have, actually have little flats on the inside of the stud, which will take a 17mm open-ended spanner. Out of interest, the Ford or the Motorcraft originals did not have this, so I was quite happy to find it. So I was able to brace the spanner like so, and could then get it properly torqued. You just want to be careful with that spanner so you don't damage the rubber. Moving on, if you're only replacing the links, you might find it just fits back to the strut with no problems. But in my case, I'd also replaced the shock, and the new springs were extending a bit longer than the old. Now you could just push down the sway bar to make up this distance, but it's a bit awkward. If you had somebody else to hold it down for you, that would be fine. But in my case, I just jacked up the wheel a few inches until the bracket lined up. I'm using the rotor here, which is not ideal, but it would be better to jack on the control arm ball joint at the hub. And whatever you do, get the studs back in the bracket, and don't forget the ABS sensor bracket, which needs to go back in the mix. On this one, I found I was able to do up the nut without the ball spinning at all, so it was much easier, and getting the torque from the outside was dead easy too. Now at this point, you will see why I installed the bottom sides first, because when that tension is relaxed, again, the sway bar will be pushed down. If we go around here to the other side of the car, you'll see I've done that left side bottom half already, because once even just one of the top sides is connected, it will, it'll push the sway bar down, and it'll make accessing that inside nut even more difficult than it is when the bar's loose. One final thing that occurred to me to say is, if you have noises from your front end that you're chasing and you suspect the drop links or sway bar, but you're not sure, you can actually drive the car with the links disconnected. I'm not saying that it's safe to leave them off, obviously, and you must be careful. Don't drive around corners at any speed. But if you find a bump that you can reliably reproduce your noise as you drive over, you could try driving over it with the links disconnected and just see if that helps you isolate the noise. And this footage is unrelated, of course. I just thought it was interesting to see these things in action. Right, hope that was helpful. Have fun.